And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Before we go into the marine forecast, we'll look at tonight's weather and see high pressure here building in toward the west coast. That's going to diminish the winds and start to clear it out here into the western interior. It'll stay a little breezy over the Alaska Peninsula into Kodiak Island with dry conditions there. A few skiffs of light snow along the eastern Arctic coast into the North Slope, possibly into the Brooks Range. And good solid rain moving into the southeast coast with this system, along with increasing south and southeast winds. Next system out here to the west tomorrow brings wind and rain. Small craft advisory, mostly small craft advisory winds here. Pribilof Islands, rain into the eastern Aleutians, possibly western Alaska Peninsula, as far east as Nelson Lagoon or Cold Bay by late tomorrow afternoon. And then with the cold front, rain into the central Aleutians there, Adak and Atka. Dry, light winds, possibly mostly sunny skies. Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Valley there, especially the Kuskokwim Delta. Actually, the entire west coast into the North Slope and Arctic coast will be dry with light winds under high pressure. Lingering showers up here over the central and eastern interior, down to about the Alaska Range. Rain pushing up into the southeastern Copper River Basin with this low that kind of tracks back to the west a little bit tomorrow. And the front gets hung up along the southeast coast, so look for some rain heavy at times there, especially on the southern panhandle. Could see several inches falling with this system. And rain, good rain back up in toward Yakutat. Then on Monday, that system kicks off and weakens into western Canada with diminishing showers over the southeast coast. Another trough here brings a chance of showers again, south central Alaska. Scattered showers possible, mostly cloudy skies over the eastern interior. Mostly sunny in the central interior, not bad for the Arctic coast and North Slope. This system pushing rain into the southwest coast and wind as well as northward there into the Bering Strait, Norton Sound. Rain, Kodiak Island, rain, eastern Aleutians. Gusty gale force west-northwest winds here with this trough swinging into the western Aleutians. And for the coastal water forecast for the south coast of the Panhandle, south to southwest winds 15 to 20 knots. South 20 knots there for the central coast. On the north coast, north to northeast winds 15 to 25 knots. Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, southeast winds 25 gusting 40 knots. And Clarence Strait, south winds at 25 knots. Lighter winds on Monday here. Central and south coast, south to southwest 15 knots. The north coast, east to southeast 10 to 15 knots. And south at 10 knots for Lynn Canal. Stevens Passage, southeast at 10. And Clarence Strait, south winds 15 knots and those seas down to 3 feet. Prince William Sound tomorrow, north at 15, northeast 15 for the eastern North Gulf Coast, north 15 for the western North Gulf Coast, north to northwest breeze at 10 knots for Cook Inlet, and northwest winds 30 knots for the Kamishak Bay area and the Barren Islands. And for Monday, Cook Inlet, east to northeast winds, or east to southeast winds, 10 to 15 knots. Southeast at 20, so lighter winds for Kamishak Bay, south at 20 for the Barren Islands. North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound, pretty uniform wind pattern there. Southeast winds 15 knots. With Kodiak Island, looking at small craft advisories tomorrow. Northwest winds 25 to 30 knots with some higher gusts. Alaska Peninsula, kind of a variable wind pattern here. South to west to northwest at 15 to 20 knots. Bristol Bay, west to 25. And for Monday, southwest winds 25 knots for Bristol Bay here. I'm sorry, south of 25 for Bristol Bay, southwest 25 for the Alaska Peninsula with 7 to 10 foot seas. Kodiak Island, southwest at 20 knots, seas 4 to 7 feet. And for the eastern Aleutians, south winds 20 to 25 knots for Sunday. South at 30 knots for Adak and Atka to about Kiska Island there. And then southwest at 30 knots, Kiska to Shimia. And for Monday, west winds 35 knots. Good for gale warnings out here west of Adak to Shimia. For Adak and Atka, west winds 30 knots. That blows eastward there. West winds all the way across on Alaska Island at 30 knots with seas running 11 to 13 feet. Southwest coast tomorrow, northwest 10 to 15 knots, north at 10 for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. Southeast winds 25 knots for the Pribilofs and 30 knots out of the southeast for St. Matthew Island. And for the Kuskokwim Delta coast on Monday, south 35 knots, seas 10 feet. Got gale force northerlies here at 35 knots for St. Matthew Island and the Pribilofs. Southwest winds 25 knots. Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. East winds 25 to 30 knots. For the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, west winds 15 to 20 knots. Down to 15 knots on the central coast and even lighter on the western Arctic coast. And the Chukchi Sea, north to northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. Chukchi Sea on Monday, east to southeasterlies 10 to 15 knots with an east breeze at 10 knots for the western Arctic coast, southeast of 15 on the central coast. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast looking at east winds at 15 knots.